Hello. I don't think anyone could deny that these are strange and challenging times indeed. So much so that I can't work from my normal studio. So, for the next few videos, I hope you'll forgive me not appearing all the way through. That may be a bonus, as much as a drawback, but you'll get my audio and you'll get my normal slides, plus a contact point where you can raise any questions. I hope you still enjoy the videos, and once we're through this crisis, I look forward to rejoining you from the usual spot. Welcome to this Killick Explains video. This week, an important topic, which is what every advisor should tell you about fees. Now, the background to this topic is what? Well, when choosing a firm of advisors, there are many things to weigh up, but fees are a pretty key one when it comes to comparing different providers and making a choice about who to go to. But what information should you therefore expect to receive so that you can make the comparison on a meaningful basis? Well, first of all, why are fees so important? You probably don't need me to tell you this, but let's go through it anyway. First of all, if you were to expect, and this is a pure expectation, a return of say 6%, and fees accounted for 3% of that, your net return, not difficult maths, is 3%. Now, the maths is less important than the fact that you therefore need to understand what fees you will be paying, because they do have a long-term and cumulative impact on your overall investment returns. So it's important to understand the level of fees, and to do that you need to be able to compare advisors on a like-for-like basis. Be a little bit wary of what are called headline rates that lure you in, only for you to find out later that actually the advice and the service you received turned out to be a lot more expensive than perhaps you first thought. Now, enter the FCA, the Financial Conduct Authority. Now, they have set up some rules designed to address exactly this problem. So, under an EU directive, gloriously known as MiFID II, firms need to give clear information about costs. The name of that directive, less important than the principle it's trying to get across, which is clear, fair, and not misleading information about costs. And this needs to be given in two forms. It's important you know this. One is called ex-ante, from the Latin, and that is in advance. And then there's ex post, as it's called, in arrears. So in other words, you should be able to compare firms before you sign up on a like-for-like meaningful basis, and then you've got the right to review actual costs later against the initial estimate you were provided with. In other words, does the cost you've actually paid stack up against the information you received up front or not? Now, what would be a basic breakdown of costs? There are a few components to this. So MiFID assumes that an investor will want to know about basically three types. Are there ongoing fees, usually taken as a percentage of, say, the underlying portfolio? Are there any one-off fees, for example, for buying an investment or selling it, on entry, on exit? And what are the incidental costs, if you like, so taxes, for example? And also, MiFID assumes that investors will want to know what they're paying for products like funds versus what they're actually paying, let's say, an investment manager and or a wealth planner for portfolio advice and or planning advice. And that information needs to be clearly broken down and available as a percentage where the pound amount is likely to vary. And in most cases, what you're paying will vary, and it will vary according to a number of factors, and it's worth bearing that in mind before you believe a headline figure. Now, definitions. So what are those different types of costs I'm talking about? Just to recap. So one-off costs. These are relatively rare these days, but you do come across them sometimes. Would include, for example, on a fund, anything to set it up and anything to leave. Ongoing fees are typically those levied for advice, investment management, planning, and fund ongoing annual management charges. Come back to that in a moment. And incidental costs, well, I mentioned tax. Two of the obvious ones would be stamp duty, which you pay when you buy shares, for example, as the buyer, and VAT. Now, here's a quick example. So what would this look like? If an advisor said, right, I understand I need to give you an upfront ex-ante example of what costs might look like, you could be presented with a schedule something like this. Now, we've got percentages basically saying here are my advisor's estimated costs and here are the total estimated costs. In other words, I'm splitting this down into what you're paying me and what you're paying, for example, to have the underlying fund run by a fund management group. And then the breakdown essentially of what this might look like going forward is broken down into, again, the advisor saying, well, you're going to pay me an annual management fee, you're going to pay transaction charges and commissions. Now that's the idea that the more often you trade, potentially the more you will pay. There may be a bulk discount available, but that's important. And other costs, like foreign exchange costs, if, for example, you're buying and selling or having bought and sold on your behalf overseas stocks and securities. Then those incidental costs, stamp duty and VAT being two obvious ones, and then there's a line showing clearly, hopefully, external fund fees. Because if part of your portfolio is funds from an external fund house, you need to know what that bit costs, aside from any other advice and services you're getting around the edges. Now, fund fees themselves then. So, it's reasonable to expect information about what you're paying a fund manager as part of this whole package, and a key features document, that's a regulatory requirement, will break down all relevant fees, typically as a percentage, depending on what they are. So these can include one-off costs again. Some funds, it's increasingly rare, charge an entry and exit fee. Ongoing annual management charges, typically as a percentage of the amount under management, and any other fees. For example, if you pay a performance-related fee in the case of maybe a hedge fund. And you're entitled to see these separately so you can decide what a fund investment will cost you. So the idea here is you can split out what you're paying for the thing that's under the bonnet, if you like, as opposed to what you're paying for the bonnet, if you want to see it that way. Now, things to watch out for then. So, fees will depend on the size of your portfolio, the volume of transactions, and the mix of what's in there, the mix of funds versus direct investments in equities. And you might have a blend of the two. So it's important to understand that and be wary of someone just quoting a blanket rate and not making it clear what assumptions they've made for you. They'll also be driven by the type of service you want. Are you looking for pure investment management? Are you looking for planning advice? Are you looking for a mix of the two? And it should be clear what you're paying for each one. And therefore, do get into the detail. Force an advisor to tell you what you'll be paying for all these various components, what assumptions they've made, and remember, you're entitled to get this in advance, and you're then entitled to get it again after the event later. So some closing thoughts on what's quite a big and can be complex topic. Fees are important, but they're not the full story. So although I've focused on fees, it's worth remembering that performance and overall service levels also matter to quite a few people. Whatever your criteria, make sure you receive full information on costs is the key message here before you make a decision. The FCA have done their best to make this as transparent as possible. The result is you may end up with quite a lot of information, but you need that and you need it explained clearly before you jump in with one particular advisor. Any questions on what's a big topic? editor@killick.com. And if you'd like to watch any of my other videos, then killick.com/learn is a great place to start.